I used to think memory was a bookshelf orderly, dependable, mine to dust and rearrange when I felt productive. I know better now. Memory is more like a tide that keeps its own calendar, swallowing and spitting out pieces of your life without asking permission. Some days it lays down pearls. Some days it leaves you with splinters of driftwood and a smell you can't wash off. I was 36 the morning the tide rolled out and took my husband with it, leaving his body on the shore like a miraculous, impossible delivery, intact, breathing, and absolutely wrong. The accident was stupid. Most of them are. He missed a yellow light he should have taken or took a yellow light he should have missed. I still can't keep the version straight. The other driver walked away. He didn't. There were sirens. There was a plastic chair in a hallway where a volunteer handed me a styrofoam cup of coffee and tried to make her face look like the neutral face of a person who isn't assessing the odds. There were the machines that made the room sound like it had a heartbeat of its own, steady as a metronome. Later, I would realize that beep is a liar. It says, "This is fine. Everything is repeating, even while your whole life is splitting into before and after." He woke up when he woke up. That's how the nurses said it, like it was its own weather report. He woke up and turned toward the window and toward me, and I got to watch him and pick me up like a puzzle piece that looks almost right and then slide me down the table because the color was off. His eyes were kind, and I felt absurdly proud of that, like I had chosen a person who would be kind even when he was lost in his own head. He asked if I was a nurse. I said no. He asked if I was his sister. I said no. He smiled, apologetic, and said, "I'm so sorry, you look familiar. Do we go to the same church?" "We don't go to church." Later, the neurologist had to use words like a retrograde amnesia, like we were ordering from a menu I didn't want to read. "The last 5 years were gone," he said, like someone had taken scissors to the film reel and left a clean edge. He remembered childhood, high school, the smell of his father's garage, the girlfriend he'd had in grad school who wore her hair in a messy bun and always had paint under her nails. He remembered the apartment he'd lived in before we met, the one with the radiator that clanked all winter like an old man complaining about his knees. He remembered waking up worried about rent. He remembered how he liked his eggs. He did not remember the way we built a life small as a wooden boat, careful and sturdy. He did not remember the day we signed papers at the title office and then celebrated in a parking lot with cheap tacos and sparkling water because the house was ours. He did not remember our wedding. He wore a navy suit. I wore a dress I didn't think I could pull off until I did. He did not remember the night we lost the baby and how I made a nest on the bathroom floor and he sat with me, silent, because he understood that there is grief you don't distract from. He did not remember any of our fights, which felt like cheating, and he did not remember the way we made up, which felt like a theft. People really, really want there to be a trick. They want a story with, and then I played our song and everything came back. I wanted that too. I wanted it with the blind optimism of a person who thinks if she arranges the facts neatly enough, the universe will care about her effort. So I brought the facts. I printed photos. I made a playlist. I tried to lay breadcrumbs. I told the story of us the way you tell it to your parents the first time you come home for Thanksgiving with company, chronological, edited, leaning on the parts that made us sound inevitable. He listened like a person trying to be polite in a waiting room. He smiled. He said, "That sounds really nice." He touched the photos like they belonged to a collection at a museum you can browse without buying the membership. Grief is an unspooling. It doesn't come as a brick to your head. That would be simple. It arrives as a thread snagging on the drawer, the door, the wrist torch of a man you love who now ties his shoes the way he did before you taught him an easier way. I called the insurance company. I sat with a social worker in an office where the blinds were 1 degree too crooked and asked questions like I knew what a good question would be. I learned to hand him information like it was not a dare, your mother's phone number, the code on our garage, the way the dog hates the vacuum. He nodded. He took notes. He thanked me for being such a good friend. Year 1 of our marriage lies inside a shoebox in the closet. We used to open it on our anniversary and laugh at how young we looked, how earnest. The box holds ticket stubs, wristbands, a napkin with a coffee stain that formed the shape of a heart on a day that had been hard until it wasn't. I brought the shoebox to the hospital like I was smuggling contraband. I thought maybe the texture of our beginning would be persuasive. He lifted a wristband between his fingers and squinted like he was trying to read a language he once knew. He said, "I remember the band. I don't remember that you were there." There's this cruelty nobody warns you about. The person you love can be present and courteous and lost at the exact same time. He thanked me for sitting with him. I was his favorite nurse who wasn't actually a nurse. When I left at night to let him sleep, he always said it was so good to catch up. I cried in a parking lot with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel like I could imprint the shape of the pain into the plastic and then leave it there. When he came home, our house was wrong for him. It was full of objects that had a story, and he had none of the captions. He didn't know why the second drawer in the kitchen sticks unless you pull left first, or why there's a faint pencil line halfway up the hallway where we started to measure a person who didn't arrive. He walked through the rooms like a very polite house-sitter. He left his shoes by the door because I told him that's what we do. He asked me where the plates were every day for 2 weeks. We laughed the first few times. The second week I laughed harder to hide the way my chest tightened. The third week I stood in the pantry and cried quietly into the rice. His phone was a museum too. He scrolled through photos the way you scroll when you're bored waiting for a bus, interested in a general way, touched by the idea of a life but not its owner. He admired our vacations like postcards. He said we seemed to like the ocean. He said the husbands looked healthy. He said you have good taste, like I was a consultant. Everybody told me to give it time. Time is the most exhausted advice in the world and the only one anybody can afford in bulk. The neurologist said the brain makes new paths. The therapist said, don't chase the old him, meet the new him. The internet said try scent triggers, so I made tomato sauce with the basil he always said smelled like July, even in December. He said it smelled good and asked if he used to help chop the onions. Apparently I married a man who once loved to cry over onions on purpose. Now he wore swim goggles to do it, and he was proud of his own ingenuity, like he'd invented the hack yesterday. The first time I realized he was leaning towards someone else, it wasn't a hand on his shoulder or a text at 2 a.m. It was his laugh. Not the laughter, I mean the angle. The way his body leaned toward a device at an aftercare appointment because it sounded like a radio station he recognized. Her name is Lena. She was in physical therapy with him for a while. She'd had surgery on her knee and wore athletic shoes that always looked like they were in a hurry. She's one of those people who treats everyone like a person, and I swear to you, I looked hard for the villain and couldn't find one. She is normal in the most disarming way, good at eye contact, good at knowing when to not ask questions, good at bringing a paper bag with extra granola bars just in case anybody needs one. I needed one. I didn't take it. I had already learned there are things you can't say out loud without sounding like a cliché you promised yourself you'd never start in. I did not say he looked at her the way he used to look at me. But I did feel the small, embarrassing pain of watching his mouth discover its own corners again. It's funny what you notice. I noticed he started choosing the same seat whenever we were in a room with choices, because from that seat he could see her without turning his whole head. I noticed he began telling stories he remembered from the years before me, stories I knew only because he told them to me once, and now he told them again like I was hearing them new. I laughed in all the places I always laugh. I watched Lena laugh there too, because those spots are objectively funny. You don't have to be married to like them. Here's the thing, I tried. I tried in ways I'm both proud of and ashamed of, sometimes in the same hour. I suggested we redo our first date. I made reservations at the ramen place where we ordered an extra egg and pretended not to notice when the server flirted with him because it made him blush and I liked his blush. It made him honest. I told him about how it had rained that night and how we'd stood under the awning of the bookstore, reading titles out loud like fortune cookie messages. I told him the joke he made about the cover with a dragon that looked like it needed a nap. He said, I remembered that book, like he was surprised, and my heart leapt like a dog that hears a car door and thinks, this is it, they're home. But then he said, I remember reading it with my ex, and the dog sat down on the porch again. He didn't mean to hurt me. He rarely did. There's a very particular helplessness in being wounded by a hand that isn't aiming at you. I burned the sauce. I undersalted the soup. I stood in Target and forgot what I came for and then cried next to the dish towels because you lose your mind in small places first. He told me he was starting to feel drawn to someone. He didn't say Lena. He didn't have to. He said he didn't want to be unfair. He said he didn't know what the rules were. He said he hates that feeling when you know you're lying by omission. I said, you're not lying, which was technically true and emotionally inadequate. I wanted to say, pick me, but I heard another, older me whisper he already did. And then he was taken away, and now what you want is a restoration, not a choice. You can't ask a person to pledge allegiance to a country they've never visited. We did the practical work. We made a schedule for therapy. We left reminders on sticky notes. He asked me once what sound I make when I sneeze because he said he feels like it must be funny, and I said, "You laugh every time," and it was only after I said it that I realized I was telling him a joke he can't hear because his body doesn't earn it anymore. He didn't start laughing at my sneeze because I told him it was funny. He smiled in the way you smile when your friend tells you they fell in love at a gas station once. Interesting. Gentle. Remote. I get it, by the way. I understand him more than anybody wants me to. He doesn't remember falling in love with me. He doesn't remember the little basement apartment with a draft and the way we built shelves together that we pretended were artisan. They leaned like they were drunk, but we loved them because we were in the kind of hunger where anything you make together tastes like victory. He doesn't remember the way we learned each other's families like you learn a new city, first the obvious landmarks, then the small side streets you avoid, then the shortcuts. He doesn't remember how we forgave each other for things that didn't deserve capital letters, but mattered anyway. He woke up in a fully furnished life with bills in both our names and a dog that runs to him like a child who doesn't care about neurology. He woke up with a ring on his finger and no movie montage of moments leading to it. If I flip it around, if I put myself in his skin, I see how terrifying it would be to have the world greet you like a queen you don't remember becoming. There are people who told me to fight. Fight for him, they said, like love is a rope and I should blister my hands. They said this without staying to load the dishwasher. They said it without watching him text me. Thanks for taking such good care of me, the way you text a neighbor who watered your plants while you were out of town. They said it without sitting on the edge of the bed while he slept the strangest sleep, limbs sprawled in someone else's favorite directions. The kind of fighting I know how to do is practical and quiet. You call the billing department and ask about the codes. You keep the receipts. You fill the pill case. You do not wrestle a man's brain into loving you by reminding it to take a left at the cul-de-sac. Once, early on, I told him about the baby. I thought it would make us real to him. Not out of cruelty, I thought the gravity would pull him into our orbit. I told him about the way the nurse's shoes squeaked and the way he held my hand without asking whether he should hold it, and the exact color the sky was when we drove home, a blue that didn't match anything. He cried, truly and cleanly, and it was so bad and so good at the same time, because here we were at last in the middle of something that had absolutely happened, and he was being who he is, sincere, compassionate, no extra noise. He said, "I am so sorry," and he was. But he was sorry the way you're sorry when someone tells you a story about a boat you never stepped on that sank. What made the decision for me wasn't his feelings for Lena, not exactly. It was the day I actually heard of the new rhythm of his life. We were on the porch. The dog was sleeping with that Labrador sigh that sounds like a commuter train settling in for the long ride. He was telling me about his day, the way the physical therapist smelled like peppermint, the tool he found in our garage that he remembered from before, an old friend who had reached out and sat with him in the yard for an hour to talk about nothing significant, which is how men say "I love you" without saying it. He looked past me at something only he could see and his mouth softened. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was like watching someone switch radio stations smoothly, no static. And I thought, this is not my soundtrack anymore. My heart stuttered and then stopped trying to match it. It was oddly peaceful, like noticing you've been clenching your jaw for months and deciding it isn't your job to hold your skull together. I didn't tell him that night. I slept in our bed, and when he rolled toward me, he said, "I hope this isn't weird," and I said, "It's okay," and I meant it. We were two people being careful with each other, and it was almost sweet if you didn't zoom out. Don't zoom out too far unless you want to see the whole coastline of what you've lost. There is one more thing, the thing that sits under all of this like bedrock. I found an email in his drafts folder 2 weeks after he came home. It was dated 3 days before the accident. My stomach went cold reading the subject, just our names, a slash between them like a thin blade. It was addressed to me. He hadn't sent it. He'd written about feeling distant. He'd written about wanting a pause, a separation, to think without the pressure of making it okay for both of us at once. He'd written about how love had started to feel like a schedule, how he felt guilty that he was bored of the way we did Sunday afternoons. He'd written that he still loved me, which is always the sentence people include when they are about to walk out the door with their shoes in their hands. He wasn't cruel. He was trying to be honest. It made me nauseous that I recognized his voice there more than I recognized it anywhere else we'd been since. I closed the laptop like it could bite. I did not tell him. I don't know if that was right or wrong. I've learned that right and wrong like to masquerade as twins when you're this tired. I kept the knowledge like a coin pressed in my fist until it made a mark in the skin. I tried to imagine we were still on the same train, headed to the same stop, and that all of this was a detour. But the truth is, I'd been holding a person who had already begun to stand up before the wave knocked him down. The accident didn't empty our house of love. It cleared the room of furniture that was already starting to wobble, the legs looking fine until you leaned on them. The day I let him go wasn't in a courtroom or a counselor's office. It was in our kitchen, the light coming in mean and honest, showing every crumb we'd left on the counter. The dog's nails clicked across the tile. He was telling me about a plan to go hiking with a group, and I knew Lena would be there, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was being erased. I felt like I had been written already on a page I could keep. I listened to him, and I loved him, and I heard an unfamiliar calm in my own voice when I said the thing I didn't know I'd been practicing. "You're not my husband anymore," I told him, steady as a person reading a label out loud to make sure she gets it right. "And I'm not your story." I didn't say it to punish him. I said it because the most loving thing I could think to do was stop asking his brain to perform a trick. He stared at me, and I watched comprehension move through him like weather. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He nodded. There are different kinds of nods. This one was a kind of both gratitude and grief and relief in one gesture. I cried without making the ugly noise. He reached for my hand like he would for anyone who was crying in front of him, and I let him hold it because I don't know why we insist on pretending that endings cancel tenderness. He said, "I don't know how to do this right," and I said, "Me neither." We sat like that for a while, his hand heavy and warm over mine, two people who had once been married and were now something else, something that doesn't have a word of trust. We did the paperwork later. It turns out there are forms for every version of loss. They don't ask you to explain the part where you were happy once and then you weren't. They don't ask whose fault it is that you can't synchronize your heartbeats. They don't ask for the email you didn't send. They don't ask for the playlist you made that didn't work. They just ask for signatures and dates, and there was something ordinary and humane about that, like the state was saying, "We can't fix it, but we can make a folder for it." I'm supposed to tell you something encouraging, right? That I learned to love myself, or that grief is a teacher with excellent office hours if you just show up. I could say those things and mean them on certain days. But the true truth is quieter and more complicated. I learned that sometimes the bravest way to keep a promise is to stop insisting on its original shape. We said it for better or worse, and I believe it. I still do. This was worse. Worse turned out not to be a dragon we could slay together. It was a fog that took our names off the mail and left us with the utility bills. He and Lena started seeing each other more. I didn't check. I didn't ask mutual friends. I let the story continue somewhere I don't live. I moved the shoebox from the closet to the top shelf, not because I'm hiding from it, but because I'm tired of colliding my head against history every time I reach for a sweater. I planted tomatoes this year. I bought a basil plant and put it in the sun. Sometimes the kitchen smells like July on a Wednesday in February, and I stand there and breathe in a life that did happen and does not need to be happening now to be real. The dog still sneezes when I vacuum. I still make the same joke about it. Some jokes belong to you even when the audience changes. People ask if he ever remembered. Memory is a tired, remember? It keeps its own calendar. I got a text months later, out of nowhere, the kind that makes your heart stand up because it knows the number before your head does. He wrote, "Do you clap after you sneeze?" It sounds absurd, but it is exactly the kind of illogical, deeply specific thing you hold onto when everything else is abstract. I do clap after I sneeze. It's involuntary. It's like my body applauds itself for surviving the surprise. He said he remembered something like that for a second and then it was gone, and he hoped I was well. I stared at the message until the room got that soft, watery feeling, and then I put my phone down. I didn't answer right away. I walked out to the garden and looked at the basil plant and thought about how many times I had wanted a miracle and what a strange, small mercy this was instead, a glitch, a flicker, not enough to build a future on, but enough to prove that the past was not a theory. I did answer later. I said yes, I still clap. I said I hoped the trail was pretty today because he hikes on Wednesdays now. I know this because the dog naps hard on Wednesdays when he comes to pick him up and take him out. We share the dog like two sensible adults who don't need to turn a pet into a hostage negotiation. He sent back a picture of the sky from halfway up a hill. It was so blue it looked like the kind you get when you turn all the saturation sliders too far and then, against your better judgment, keep it. He said it was beautiful. I wrote, "It is." Sometimes I think about that email draft. I used to wonder if we would have separated anyway without the concussion and the glare of fluorescent lights. It's a useless question, the kind you keep on a shelf like a souvenir from a trip you don't recommend. But then I think maybe the accident didn't end us so much as remove the illusion that we had control over the ending. Maybe love is not the story you write together as much as it is the agreement to keep reading the same page until both of you are ready to turn it. When one person loses a page in a crash, in a quiet apartment, in an unsent email, there is a kind of love that looks like pointing to the margin and saying, "This is where you stopped," and there is another kind that looks like closing the book and handing it back. "You're not my husband anymore," I said. "And I'm not your story." I still believe in stories. I believe in the way they stitch us to ourselves when everything comes undone. I'm telling you mine because if you ever find yourself at a kitchen counter with basil and a dog and a person whose eyes are the right shape but not the right temperature, I want you to know that letting go isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes it is the exact opposite. It is choosing to step out of the tide and let the water carry what it wants without dragging you under with it. There are days I pass our old ramen place and I let the memory play, unthreatening now, like a song from a summer where the windows were always down. I think about the rain and the awning and the joke about the dragon who needed a nap. And I smile with my whole mouth, partly because it's funny, and partly because I am finally on a page that is only mine, writing in a handwriting I recognize, leaving room in the margins for whatever happens next.